Welcome back. We are now going to begin Module 18, which is also concerning solving quadratic equations. And we're going to learn in this module about another method. Now I know what you're thinking. You're saying, Miss Black, we've already learned how to solve quadratic equations using factoring, and we also learned how to solve quadratic equations using the square root property. Why would we need a third method? Well, let's take a look at a PowerPoint and an example, and then you'll see why a third method's going to be necessary. If you look, we have the equation x squared minus 8x minus 11 equals 0. It's an equation, it has an equal sign, it's quadratic, it has the x squared. Now, it's already set equal to 0, so in my mind, it's ready to factor. So let's see if we can factor this expression. Well, do we have a GCF? No. Can we do difference of perfect squares? No, because we don't have two terms. We obviously have three terms on the left side in the correct descending order. So this is the trinomial rule, and we know it's an easy trinomial because our leading coefficient is 1. So in my head, I'm visualizing two sets of parentheses, and I'm working with the first term, x squared, and I know I'd have an x times an x. Then I would go to my last term, 11. Well, I know the factors of 11 are 1 and 11 because that number is prime. Well, the problem is, will the factors 1 and 11 subtract to make that middle term negative 8x? And we obviously know the answer to that. It's no. 1 and 11 would subtract to make a 10. So that shows us we cannot factor this quadratic equation to solve it. That does not mean there is no answer. That just means we can't use that method. So now we go to option B, plan B, which is if we can't factor our quadratic to solve it, we try the square root property. Well, to do the square root property, we have to follow our steps. Step 1 is to isolate the term that is squared. So that means the x squared has got to be on the left by itself, and we got to move those other terms to the right. So to move the negative 8x and the negative 11 over to the right side, we would do the opposite of subtracting. We would add both of them. So now our equation is x squared equals 8x plus 11. Good. Now that we got the squared term isolated, we would square root both sides. So if you look at your PowerPoint, that's what I've done. And we all know on the left side, the square root of x squared would be x. That's great. But everybody now look at the right side. We want to square root 8x plus 11. And if you recall, every equation we solved using the square root property on the right side would just have a constant, a number. It never had a variable. We cannot square root the 8x plus 11 and get a number out of there. So we don't have a solution. Even though we have x equals, we don't have a solution that's a number. So that's showing you with this quadratic equation, factoring doesn't work and square rooting doesn't work. So that's why we need a third method. The third method to solve a quadratic equation is called the quadratic formula. Now, formulas are great. We just did in Module 17 the Pythagorean theorem, which was a formula. You know from geometry there's all kinds of formulas. There's formula to find a perimeter, there's formula to find area, there's formulas to find volume. In real life, there's a formula to convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit. Okay? There's formulas all over the place. All a formula is an equation that has several variables, and you substitute those variables with numbers, and then you do the calculation. So there is a formula called the quadratic formula, and the quadratic formula is used to solve quadratic equations. It can't be used to solve any other equation, just a quadratic equation. Now, it is a formula, which means you have to memorize it. So if you look at your PowerPoint, your quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And I know what you're saying. There's no way, Miss Black, I can memorize that. It's too long. Yes, you can. We're just going to sing it. And we're going to sing it to the most obnoxious tune I know, to Pop Goes the Weasel, which is In a Jack in the Box. Now, I'm not the best singer in the world, but I'm going to sing for you. So when I memorize the quadratic formula, this is how it sounds. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, everybody sing with me. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. If you can memorize that formula, then you will be able to solve any quadratic equation that does not factor and we cannot square root. See you in the next module.